I received a phone call one day from a woman who was interested in buying my resort patio house, a house that I really loved. And I wasn't quite ready to sell the house yet, but she wanted to talk to me about it. And I said, well, why don't we set up a meeting sometime? And I told her that I was a negotiation professor, so that if we were going to go through this process, I was not interested in using a coercive power method or any hardball strategies, but I would like to adopt what I call the practice of power of understanding method. She said, sure, well, I'm interested in that. So we set up a meeting, and this is the story of how we applied the practice of understanding. So the first thing we talked about was, in general, I knew from the research and experience I've ever had of selling a house, is that a house is an extremely emotional issue for both a buyer and a seller. So I knew that we were going to need to talk about some of those interests or needs we had on a more emotional level. And the other thing that I know that selling a house is a very transactional situation normally. And normally you would bring in a broker and you would both advocate and go really hardball so each party can get the best that they possibly can in that kind of situation. So from my experience, both in research and in practice, I found that you actually waste a lot of time and you also waste a lot of energy, and you're not as satisfied going through that kind of hardball experience. So we decided not to use a broker, and we both started to spend some time talking to each other, exploring what are the things that she needed. And through that conversation, we found out that we had pretty compatible interests, her as a buyer and me as a seller. So then we said, then let's take a look at finding some kind of objective criteria. So we went out and got a market evaluation, and that fit fairly squarely between what she and I were kind of looking at in terms of price. Then we both said, let's look at your alternatives. So she went off and started looking at other houses. She looked at maybe staying in the house that she was and maybe remodeling it in some way. And I actually talked to a couple other buyers and also thought about me keeping the place for a while. So we both went and evaluated those alternatives, which was difficult because at that point we were pretty well interested in selling to each other. And to talk about the alternatives is a difficult situation, but it helped both of us, because we realized that this is the better deal for us to go forward with our deal. So then we actually developed what we called the ZOPA, or the Zone of Potential Agreement. So the evaluation came in at 190, and in terms of what I had looked at with my accountant, in terms of what I paid it for it and invested in it, a little extra would be 200. And then the two of us did some discussion, not in terms of hardball, how to get that final number, but we actually looked at all the other options around it. In terms of the timing, it was complicated in terms of when each of us could move and in terms of how she was going to get her financing, and there were a lot of elements that we linked to the actual price. But in the end, we decided on 195. So I was very happy, and we both settled in the middle, but we didn't fight with each other in that zone to get the final agreement. So ultimately, we both came out of that experience getting what we needed, and one of the things we both went away saying is that part of the satisfaction and the value of a negotiation is how you feel about the situation. That there would be no remorse, because you always hear about the buyer's remorse and seller's remorse. Both of us were happy that we had gotten what we wanted, and I'm invited to go to her house sometime for coffee. So it turned out to be a very good experience to put it into practice, but it is very difficult to start with just the needs and the interests and not to get positional right away on the price, for example, and to actually build up toward coercion with each other. So what I took from that is that a very quick way to do a preparation and to want to stay away from coercive power is to use that element of the power of understanding, which is, first of all, really get an honest appraisal of what is it that you're going through and you're negotiating in that situation. It's just not about the house itself, but all of those other issues wrapped around that. Be sensitive and to be honest about what those are. Then to look at where is the power of the compatibility of interests. Then look at your alternatives to look at whether this is really the best place for you. And then to actually look at how you set the zone and then you talk about how you're going to settle on the final price. Keep price as the last component because it's a symbol of all of the other elements of the negotiation. So I would say that you can have better satisfaction and you can actually get more material value if you practice the power of understanding.